With over 750 subscribers, I really do appreciate every single one of you. This channel has blown up, and this year has been amazing thanks to you guys. I thank you all for your comments. And here we are at the 200 video, number 200. And I thought, what should I do? I did something personal with my 100 video, number 100. So I think every 100 I'll do something personal. And today, how did I become a Hellenic Polytheist? So let me tell you my story, and hopefully those that are curious, this will help you out. So I come from a pretty interesting background, so I'll tell you a little bit about myself and where I come from before we get to where I am. So just to say, to start off though, that this year, around this time, marks 11 years of being quote-unquote pagan. But as I've mentioned before, how spirituality evolves, I didn't stay in the same path these whole entire 11 years. So I speak from experience when I tell you guys about that. So let me go back to the beginning, literally my grandparents. So I come from a spiritual background, a Christian background. My grandfather was a pastor, an evangelist, and my dad, for a short time, was a preacher as well, who is still very much into the Christian spirituality. So that's the lineage I come from. I have other aunts, uncles, grandfathers, great-grandfathers that were pastors in the church. So I have a very spiritual ancestry. So that's probably where the love for spirituality even comes from. But what was interesting about my grandparents is that they would also get quote-unquote visions from God. And they had a good reputation. So much so that whenever they had a vision, people would actually stop and listen. Now, that's a reputation that is a good one if they actually pay attention and don't just call you off and say, oh, that's just crazy. You know? So the thing about it is that if it has, I always say that if it had God attached to it, it's called a vision or a vision from God. But if you put it into another aspect, you would say that that's a psychic ability or mediumship that they were able to see something that would happen. And like I said, it was a good reputation if people believed what they had to say, because there must be some connection to it coming true. But the whole visions from God versus heresy and devil worship and evil, it's a veil, it's a very thin veil, you know. But just to stop there, but it was interesting that my grandparents were quote-unquote had this ability to see things and predict things that would come true. I'm looking at notes, by the way. But so my own paranormal experiences came when I was about 5 or 6 years old. Is the one I remember probably the best. Well, I take that back. I remember I was probably 3 to 4. I remember seeing when I go to sleep at night, at the end of my bed, a woman in a hood. I used to think was a witch. A hooded woman was just standing there at the foot of my bed. I never knew what that was, but it used to scare me. And it was always in my first apartment that I stayed in. And when we left and moved, never saw her again. And it wasn't one of those deals that you have a chair with a coat draped over it and you turn the light on, like on the cartoons, and it's just my jacket on the chair. It wasn't like that. It was more like the scary stories that at night you wake up and you just see someone standing there. And when you turn the light on, there's nothing there. It's one of those things. But the one I clearly and vividly remember was when I was about 6, it had to be about 6 or 7, because that's around the time they passed away. But my grandparents that I mentioned had the psychic ability. They passed away. And I remember standing, I was actually outside playing. This wasn't a dream. I was actually playing one day outside, and I saw my granddad standing on top of the driveway. So the house that we lived at is here, we'll say, and my grandparents' house is here. So there's a driveway, obviously, that connects down a hill and goes down. And my granddad was standing on top of the hill after he had passed away. And my little 7-year-old self or 6-year-old self, however old I was, never really made the connection, but I just saw him standing there and he started walking towards his old house. And I remember running after him saying, "Papa," which was what we called him. And he went all the way down to his house. And I remember him walking down to his basement. And so when you go to the house, you turn left, you go down towards the basement was where he lived. And I followed him. I wasn't like right on his heels close, but I was a good distance. But I saw him enough to go down there. And I saw him go down there, and when I went to the basement to see him, no one was there. And that freaked me out. And I ran all the way back to my mom, which was at obviously our house. And I still remember that, and that was a really freaky day. And the other big time I had something supernatural happen was about 11 years ago. I was staying at a friend's house, and I spent the night there. And they were pagans, and I'll get into who they were later in this story. But I was just staying there, spending the night, and I slept on their couch. But during the night, I just felt like there was someone just looking at you. You know, when you get that feeling that there is someone staring at you, but there was no one there. But I went to sleep, and then I had a dream. I had a dream of this brown-haired guy with a beard, kind of a chubby guy, just sitting at the foot of my bed, just looking at me, and or the foot of the couch. And I don't remember too much more than that, other than I woke up the next day, and I told him, I said, I had this dream about this guy, and I just had this feeling that I was on the couch. When I was on the couch, someone was just looking at me, and he was like I dreamed he was sitting at the foot of the couch. And I told them, and they laughed. And they didn't laugh because they thought I was making it up or silly, but I'm going to give him a name. They're like, "Oh, that's just Brian." He said, "A lot of people spend the night here. They had the same dream of that guy, that's our friend." So basically, it was a friend that used to live there, and he would sleep on the couch. And he passed away a few years before I knew them. But they're like, "Oh, that's just Brian. We have people spend the night all the time," and it's just, and they thought it was comforting, because that was proof that there is an afterlife, and he's happy because he's at peace now. And they said, "Oh, that's just Brian." So he just gets curious whenever it's new people he doesn't know. He'll come and visit them. And there you go, guys. So yes, I do believe in spirits and ghosts. And for those two experiences, that's 100% legit and real. 100% really happened. There you go, guys. So spirits and all the supernatural stuff you hear about do exist, because it's pretty interesting, especially since I saw his picture later, and yeah, that was definitely the guy, and I had never seen that guy before in that experience. So there you go, guys. So some interesting stuff. So we'll skip back a little bit before then. So around my high school years, how I found paganism. Let's go back to that. Around my high school years, I grew up in the church, so pretty much all my life. I very much remember going to Sunday school and church, I should say, every week. But just like a lot of teenagers do, you become, well, not a lot, but some of them, they become kind of disillusioned with what they believe in, you know, the crisis of faith kind of thing, you know. And a lot of things that I've mentioned in other videos didn't really stick with me, and I had a lot of questions about that. So I eventually became spiritual and not Christian. So I was that for years, like before I found paganism, I was spiritual but not religious. It was in that category, you know, that yeah, you're Christian if I have to pick something I believe in, but I wasn't a practicing one, you know. So that's where I was. So from about the age of 16 to 26 something, 27, because that's around the time I met someone I'm going to talk about. But for about a good 10-year time, I was spiritual but not religious. But I did have, interesting enough, during that time, some pagan and Wiccan friends in high school, because I was friends with everybody. And I had a friend, I remember a good friend who I'm still friends with now. I remember seeing his pentacle ring on his hand, and I would ask him about it, and he would tell me about Wicca and what that was. It was interesting. I was open. I wasn't a judgmental person, so I was willing to listen and be friends with everybody. Little did I know that years later that would start playing a role in my life. Not he directly, but that spirituality would lead me and follow me pretty much all the way to now. So we come to 2009, which I said that is 11 years ago. I met a girl online. So I was still in my spiritual but not religious, it's not Christian phase, or just that's just where I was in life. And I happened to find out that on our third date or third talking to, that she told me she's a witch. And so we got to know each other for a few months. So I lived with her for a few months, and on and off we got to talk about her spirituality. She really never really wanted to talk about it much. It was more of a shame. Well, really, not really that. It was more of a family. She was more of a traditional focused kind of witch that it was a family tradition that they kept guarded very secretly. Some of the things she showed me were interesting, that are stuff that I can't really talk about. One reason being because I don't remember all of it. Another is that it was family secrets, so I don't really talk much about that. But it was interesting, the things I learned. But that was a short part of my life. It was just I was with her like maybe 6 months, we'll say, maybe. But it was an interesting part of my life, and it was around that time I got a particular book that I'm sure some of you guys, if not all of you, have heard of, and it is Scott Cunningham's Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner. I bought it, never really picked it up really, but so I just had it with me. So I knew what it was. I knew a little bit about what Wicca was, but I didn't read it really in the time I was with her. And then we eventually broke up. And really, what we believed really were completely separate ideals. She was very much more of the Christian witch, that she believed in Jesus and all that stuff, and obviously I didn't go that route. So that entered the next phase of my life. So I read Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner by Scott Cunningham. An awesome book. If you're in a Wicca or wanting to get into it, that's the book to start with, I'd say. Especially if you're more into the eclectic stuff. But anyway, I read that book, and it really spoke to me. I was like, wow. And a lot of people have that experience, that it just really spoke to me, and I was like, wow, it's just a new view on life, that there's a God and a goddess. So it kind of opened up my mind on polytheism. It was the beginning of polytheistic ideas, that there's not just Jesus and God and all that stuff, but there's a goddess too. And this is when I joke and tell you guys all the time about how my brain couldn't handle it. I mean, it was a fight. And I hate to call it brainwashing, but I was just hardwired into that belief of monotheism so much that the idea that there's a goddess and there are gods, I mean, I was like, and it really, I do that all the time when I tell you guys about that, but my brain was like smoking. You could see the smoke coming out of my ears, just the fight of monotheism that was in my head versus the idea of polytheism. So Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner, it really spoke to me, and it made a lot of sense that, you look in nature, there's male and female. Even in our bodies, our DNA has female and male traits, that it's not just all male. So even if you're male, you have female genes in you and so forth. So, and like I said, there's male and female in just about everything that exists, that's living, just about everything. So stuff like that were good arguments. And but that wasn't the only argument that convinced me, but that's just one of the things I always remember. So yeah, so I read that, and then I really started eating up books. I would get the next book and the next book, watch YouTube videos, which made me a huge fan of YouTube. So that was before YouTube was nothing like it is now, but that's why I love YouTube, and I'm glad you guys are here because I learned a lot. And I appreciate you guys who comment on my videos and you thank me. Someone taught me some stuff too, so but yeah. And then I decided I didn't want to be just a solo practitioner. I wanted to go out and find somebody. So I went to witchvox.com, which was it was a lot of things, but it also had a place, Witchvox sadly doesn't exist, so don't look it up. It disbanded, I guess you could say, a year or two ago. But they used to have a place that you could look it up by your state and city for local covens. And so I looked it up, and there was one very close, like 20 minutes away from my house. So I got in contact with them, and they were very open. And I did something that is risky to do, but they invited me to come over and just meet them, just to see who I was and for me to see who they were. So I went over to their house, and we clicked. I was really quiet back then. Can you believe that, guys? That I was really quiet since I do all this. But yeah, so I went over to her house and we spoke. And then she invited me to one of her next meetings. And they were very loose when it comes to, they were definitely very much eclectic. But they were also really serious about their spirituality. And I learned a lot. And I was with this coven for a year. We'll say it was a year. And they really showed me some things about tarot. And I had and this was the family that I was with that I had that ghost visit on the couch. It was when I was with them. And I'll never forget that one of the biggest experiences I had, another supernatural experience, was when we did a Ouija board. She had a Ouija board out. And I'll never forget that it was one of my aunts that came through that passed away. And it was really strange because out of all people, it was her. So I might tear up a little, but it was touching. But yeah, it was me, the head priestess, and then another girl. The one that I mentioned in a couple of videos ago that was afraid to go to hell, even though she was pagan. She was another one. But yeah, we did a Ouija thing, and it was my aunt that came through. I've never mentioned anything to the girls about who she was, because they said blank, and they said, "Who is that?" And I said, "That's my aunt." And then she asked the question, "Am I happy?" And I said, "Yeah." And like I said, it was a really touching thing. So yeah, so that meant a lot. So that was probably my most favorite thing that happened when I was with that group. But sadly, we parted ways for personal reasons, and I was solo again. So I stayed solo a while and reading YouTube videos, and I looked up, I think it was Witchvox again, that I found my next coven. So it was even closer. Really good group. They were definitely more traditional, and I learned way more because they were, practicing the Sabbats and the Esbats, and on Yule, and we'd have parties and actually do rituals and so forth. They were very traditional, and I learned a lot. And there you go. So I was with them 2 or 3 years. So all in all, about 4 or 5 years. And then what happened? The main reason I left is that I realized a big thing is that I was not a witch. Not because of them judging me, but just a personal realization that even when I was Wiccan and eclectic pagan, or whatever you want to call it, I was considering myself Wiccan then, and I was. It was the spiritual aspect that I was always interested to. I was more interested in praying to the gods and the goddess, the god, goddess, and the gods, more than I was actually doing witchcraft and spells. So it just really wasn't for me. I was always more into the spiritual, connecting to divinity. And so when I came to that realization is when I left. Now, what is interesting that I got out of the years of being a Wiccan is that I got to know Goddess Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft that I followed at the time. And through her, thus the beginnings of my Hellenic journey began. So I remember looking up Hellenic, let's just say Hecate videos. I read Hecate books, and I do recommend those books. And you've watched my Hecate videos, I give you the books that I'm talking about. But it was through her that I discovered Hellenic Polytheism. So I left my second coven and stayed with Hecate, reading about her. And then on YouTube one day, I was looking up Hecate videos, and one of them was called the Hellenic view. Something, I don't think it was called the Hellenic Polytheistic view, but it was like the Hellenic view of Hecate. And I watched that video. Very interesting. Very interesting. Planting those seeds. It was planting those seeds. And then, so then I was a solo person again, and I had Hecate, but a god I didn't really have. You're always trying to connect to divinity, but Hecate was there. And so I just went to Goodwill, basically. It was something called Restore. I think it was Restore. I don't think it was Goodwill. But it's basically the same thing. And they had, in the store when I was just looking around, they had Greek vases that had vines, also with grapevines and stuff around it. And it made me think of Dionysus. And I thought about Dionysus, and it made me think about how much I loved Greek mythology when I was in school. I loved Greek mythology, so much so that in elementary school, I think, there was a contest that you can write a story and submit it to be recognized by the state. And I didn't win. But the story I decided to make, that was an original story. So you basically had to write an original story. And what I chose was to make my own Greek mythology story. What was it about? From what I can remember a little bit, and that's why I like making these videos, is because I get to record this, and as years go by, I can always look back, not only share with you guys, but remember things as I forget them and the older I get. So what did I write about? So I remember writing a story about the first man. I didn't know anything about Prometheus and all that stuff at the time. I was a little kid, but I did a story about Zeus and Hera. I don't remember if it was the first man or just a man. So they wanted a new kid, because I knew about how Zeus always has children. So I made a story about them creating the first man. So what was interesting, again, or a man. So what was interesting about the story, though, however, is I remember that they took elements of the earth to make this man. Like, they used the blue from the ocean to make color his eyes. They used the bark of trees to color his hair brown, stuff like that. And I don't remember what happens to that character. I just mainly remember Zeus and Hera make a man and use the elements of the earth to create the colors of his skin, hair, and eyes. I'm sure he died or became a hero, because that's what happens to Greek heroes. But so I submitted that. So it's really interesting. And seeing Dionysus, or thinking about Dionysus, it brought back those memories. And so I began to study and look into Greek gods, because I tried originally to look into more Celtic gods, because that was what usually a lot of Druids and Wiccans do. So, and none of them I really connected with. I tried to look into Kyrdanos and everything, and it never really clicked. But then I started looking into Greek gods and goddesses, and I found out about Hestia. She's the gentle goddess, and things like that. Don't let me ever understate about how important YouTube was and is in my life. I mean, I still love videos and watch videos and learn. So I discovered more through YouTube videos, and I found out about Hestia. I found out about other gods and goddesses, and the god that I really connected to, that's no surprise to all of you, because I do most of my videos on him if I do anything on the god, and that is Apollo. I discovered Apollo because I was reading about the gods and goddesses and what their gods and goddesses over. And he was the god of light and truth. I was like, wow, a god of truth. And that in mythology it says no lie will ever part his mouth. Everything he speaks is true. How awesome is that? I was just at a time, I guess I needed some truth and light. I was like, wow, a God of light and truth, and that no false word parts his mouth. How awesome is that? So I really got into wanting to know more about Apollo. And then from there, everything else came. And here I am today, guys. So I read books, and I always try to read and watch videos. So this is where I am now. And that was about 3-4 years ago was when I started my Hellenic path. Still learning, still watching videos. I love watching videos, and here I am doing videos for you guys. And again, I really do appreciate everyone that watches, especially that made it to the end of this video. And I really do thank you guys. You guys are awesome. And that's it. Before I get too sentimental, I'll talk to you later. Bye.